This week, we've got questions on Scandinavia, local politics and monarchies, and Charles talks about the history and culture of taverns and inns in the Middle Ages. Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu, now being broadcast and podcast on the Crusade Channel. Talk radio the way it should be at crusadechannel.com. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a volcanic Charles Coulombe.
Volcanic? Volcanic? You mean like Krakatoa west of Java? Mount Vesuvius? Mount Etna? Mount Rainier? Mount St. Helens?
That's right. It's pretty fiery today. I think it was that Carl Ronner question on the pre-show that really turned into a 20-minute tirade.
Well, he does kind of get the magma in my soul moving. It's true.
I just regret not having that in my pocket for the non-judgmental episode. That would have been beautiful. That would have been glorious.
Yeah, but
trying to help you through your issues, you know?
Yeah, but see, now that I've gotten through that, I'm back to being non-judgmental.
Oh, that's not fair.
There was a mistake on your part to bring that up.
That was an enormous mistake because now I've just I fired all the bullets.
You bet. And now all you've got left is unconditional acceptance. It's time for a group hug, everyone. Let's all pull together. Hug your screen as you're watching this. We're all in this together. Do you feel better now?
No, I don't.
That you've been hugged.
Maybe I wasn't looking for hugs.
Tough. You got them anyway.
Maybe I wasn't in the market for hugs.
You just got the biggest group hug from all of our fans that you've ever had in your life. I mean, everybody just now, they all did it. You have been group hugged literally across the planet. The waves of good vibes and that kind of stuff that's flowing at you at this moment from across the cosmos is amazing.
It's great.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's wonderful. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought you'd feel that way. Because you see, those were days when my soul was volcanic, as the scoriac rivers that roll down the something or other slopes of Mount Yannick in the sulfurous climes of the pole, the arboreal climes of the pole. Let's see, I think that's Ullalum, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
A poet?
Ullalum by Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh.
There are no stories like Poe's stories. Ah, yes, indeed. To Ullalum, a ballad. The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they were crisped and sere. The leaves, they were withering and sere. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber, in the misty mid-region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber, in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Here once through an alley titanic of cypress I roamed with my soul, of cypress with Psyche my soul. These were days when my heart was volcanic, as the scoriac rivers that roll, as the lavas that restlessly roll their sulphurous currents down Yannick, in the ultimate climes of the pole, that groan as they roll down Mount Yannick, in the realms of the boreal pole. Yep, that's what that is, all right, Ullalum. Volcanic Yannick, get it?
Yeah.
Mount Yannick in the boreal climes of the pole, that groan as they roll down Mount Yannick. You don't, I mean, it doesn't give you the picture the lava groaning as it rolls down Mount Yanak and the boil climbs the pole. You're not
Um,
impressed by that. You don't care.
no.
All right, fine. If you don't care, you don't care. However, that brings us to a couple of other points.
Yes.
Yesterday was the feast of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which means in the pre-55 calendar or sometime like that, it is in the octave. We are on the second day here on the 9th of the octave of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And more than that, if you can believe it, it is the feast day of St. Peter Claver. So a shout out to all my brothers of the Knights of Peter Claver. And that's not all. That's not all. It is also, are you ready? California Admission Day.
Yeehaw.
1850, when the great state of California, by the grace of God, free and independent, became part of the Union.
That's great.
Think of all that California really means to you. Think of the missions, the Padres going up El Camino Real all the way from San Diego to Sonoma. Think of the brave Spanish soldiers and the Presidios, San Diego and Santa Barbara, Monterey, and San Francisco. Think of the ranchos and the rancheros, of Zorro and Ramona. All the color and glamour that was Spanish California. And then think of the Bear Flag Revolt, the American occupation. And think of the gold rush and the arrival in California from people from all over the world, and the beginnings of the great state as we know it. Because, of course, there's so many people who come in starting in 1848 that 2 years later there were enough to become a state. That was the requirement. And then think of California as the great resort for health, wealth, and warmth as the transcontinental railroads come through and old money comes to New England and makes places like Pasadena and Montecito. And then, after World War I, guess what comes out? Hollywood. Yes, indeed. The movie industry comes out. The golden days of Hollywood, ladies and gentlemen. First, the silent films, and then the talkies, and then Walt Disney. Oh, but wait, there's more. World War II brings out tons more people, and there's aerospace and various other industries. And I didn't even touch on all the agricultural stuff, the citrus and the beautiful orange crate art and all that kind of stuff. And then, as I say, in the 50s and the 60s, the early 60s anyway, you've got people coming from all over the country. California is the land of opportunity, just like in LA Confidential. And that's our California. And if that weren't enough, there was a man who was able to show it all to us.
That's amazing.
What was his name?
Hugh Hauser.
That's right. And what did he show us all? California's gold. You gotta get that. California's gold. Oh, that's amazing. So how do you feel? You were born in California. I mean, I was an immigrant and I'm not there at the moment. But you have been in California your whole life. Do you feel like a tender child of the sun-kissed South?
The sun-kissed South?
Yeah, Southern California. It gets kissed by the sun.
Yeah, I think I do.
Are you just reveling on this California Admissions Day? Are you just reveling in your identity as a Californian?
I always am.
Are you glad the family moved out from New York?
Actually, definitely. I'm definitely glad.
Are you glad you don't have any competition with the Manicotis?
Yeah, yeah. It's been a long, hard road, but yeah.
So you're glad you left all the rest of them behind.
Yeah, we really wide open country in that sense over here. You know, it's so crowded back in New York.
So you're not in a New York state of mind.
Nope, sorry, Billy Joel. Nope.
You're not going to take the Hudson River line.
No,
You've been to Hollywood, seen all the movie stars in their limousines. You've been high in the Rockies, in the Everglades. But you're not going to leave it all behind you.
no. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
All right. So you're not going to Katz's Deli.
Kansas Deli?
Katz's Deli.
Oh, Katz's Deli.
Yeah. You're not going to go there.
No, there's bigger things in Katz's Deli. I mean,
in New York?
Is that really like the supreme deli, like Katz's Deli? That's
Well, there's some difference of opinion, but certainly Katz's Deli is one of the best out.
interesting. So that's like, what's the Italian restaurant that everyone talks about?
Mama Leone's?
No, I can't remember. My dad would always talk about it.
Really?
Oh
Where
man,
was it?
I'm really frustrated. I thought it was in Manhattan, but I could be wrong. I think it was Delmonico's that my dad would always talk about.
Well, Delmonico's, I mean, it certainly is an old restaurant, but it's had several different incarnations under different managements. It's not like Keen's, which has always been in the same place. Not that we're advertising. Or Pete's Tavern, or the White Horse Inn, or. Do you want me to go on like this?
No, I want to put you out of your misery.
I'm getting hungry just sitting here thinking about dear old New York. But see, my memories of New York are different from yours. For you, it's just the place where they came from to carve out a whole new.
Yeah, we just
to
a fresh
carve
start.
out.
Fresh start.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Sure. That. Yeah. Okay. But see, I remember, your great uncle saying to me, "There's more room out there." And my dad saying, "Yeah, but Giovanni, it's like the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn." And he said, "Don't talk to me about them bums." He didn't seem to see that there was
that there was a what?
A certain commonality in abandoning the old neighborhood to come out to the West Coast.
Well, you should talk. You've abandoned the old neighborhood.
Me?
You're out in Austria.
It's closer to the old neighborhood than LA is. This is the real old neighborhood. If it's any older, it'd be ancient Egypt. Let's just say that I'm a little bit like poor old T.S. Eliot, because he was the descendant of a Brahmin family, in New England. But his grandfather came out to the frontier to St. Louis and started the first Unitarian church in St. Louis. And then he was brought up there in the Midwest. Well, he goes to Harvard in the ancestral homeland of the Eliots. But then he takes it a step further and goes back to England, where they came from originally. And he ended up being buried in the parish church that his multiple great-grandfather had left for Massachusetts in the 1600s. So I don't know what you would call that.
Yeah.
I mean, St. Louis was as far west as the Elliots went. And then he, in one step and then two, went all the way back to where they began, quite literally.
Well, I don't know.
So if from Austria I go back to Bari, we could bring the whole family back home.
Well, why is that contingent on you going back there?
Because nobody else in the family will. That's why. I mean, oh yeah, Tyrone would show up there. That would work.
All right, we're prattling. Let's move on. Memes of production.
Gosh, you always do that. You know, you're always saying, "Let's be productive. Let's get something done."
Yeah, this is the private sector, Charles. This isn't the public sector. This isn't government.
You're right. Okay,
in the private sector, people expect results.
That's true. That's true. In public sector, they'll pay all amounts of cash for absolutely nothing in return. So you're right. I stand corrected. All right, let's move along.
All right, memes of production.
Nationalize the memes of production.
For the common good. All right, we have one. Well, it's a meme from superfan Philip, but it's also pretty serious. So he, I guess, found a clipping from a very old place, Vogue of Nonsense. This occurs in popular entertainments as well as in serious arts. Think, for example, of the Vogue of a Nonsense song like Mertze Dotes, or of a play like Harvey with its huge invisible rabbit.
Okay, firstly, I deny the premise here that those are nonsense. I think Mertze Dotes is a song whose lyrics spoke to the angst of a country on the verge of change. It was a song that, in a sense, epitomized the hopes of a whole generation who, having lived through the Depression and World War II, were seeking something deeper, something truer than what they've been exposed to. And that's why I think that at that time, Harvey answered that question, answered that yearning, that hope. And I believe that both Harvey and Mertze Dotes should be seen not as quote unquote vogue of nonsense, but as a deeper, truer, more honest self-evaluation of a nation and a generation in the midst of change.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about hope, I guess. You can do anything you want with hope.
Yeah, you sure can. So, but how'd you like that explanation, huh? Yeah.
You could give a special lecture at Harvard with that type of BS, I can tell you that.
BS? What a thing to say. Let me tell you something. What I just gave you was something that I've been thinking about. I mean, here we stand in the third decade of a new century, a new millennium, not really aware, not knowing what faces us. Behind us is the past. The future stands before us. Here in the present are the tools we have to work with.
That's typically how it goes.
You noticed that. Picked up on that one. Nothing gets past you, Hawkeye. Let us honor the past, work in the present, work for the future, and respect the present.
Gosh. Is that really how all these lectures and all these political speeches have gone, and I just haven't noticed?
You haven't picked up on it. But I mean, stop and think about what people are saying. Right now, in this country, there are people who are hungry, who would like something to eat. People who are cold, who would like the means with which to clothe themselves and their families, people who are without housing and ask for decent homes to live in. What I say is, why is it that these people have to ask these questions? What is wrong with our society that we have not yet learned how to answer these needs?
Okay, yeah, that's
See?
that's
It's
pretty
not
standard.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not hard if you think about it. All over this great country of ours, agriculture is looking for fertilizer, hoping for rain. Industry is looking for markets and raw materials with which to manufacture the things they need to sell. Banking and commerce are dependent upon the partnership of consumer and producer. I say this country of ours must be allowed to continue these things, and that anyone who stands in their way is no friend of his country.
That's a little bit. Where are you grabbing from there? Are you grabbing from FDR? That sounded a little.
Oh, FDR was always kind of on my mind. He was the champion BS artist. I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, statesman.
Yeah. Okay. Well
But
done.
but he's I mean, saying the obvious. Look at the illiterates in this country of ours who are unable to read. Yeah, that's kind of what illiterates can't do. That's kind of the point. You don't want to subject this kind of rhetoric to real analysis of any kind.
Yeah. All right. Book of the week. What do you got for us?
I'm glad you asked that question. A book by an old friend of mine named Thomas Molnar. And the name of the book is The Counterrevolution. Basically, it does two things that were never done before. It came out in 1967. I didn't know him when I first read it in college, but I came to know the author later. Basically, as we know, modern history, since at least, well, arguably the Reformation, and certainly since the English Civil War, as it was called in my youth, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms now, has been a series of revolutions. And these are all looked at by scholars, and certainly were in Molnar's day, exhaustively. What was not looked at exhaustively were their opponents, the counter-revolution. So what he tries to show in this book, which I really cannot recommend highly enough, is the fact that it wasn't simply random malcontents who opposed these things. Rather, there were definite types and sorts of people who opposed the revolutions. And they had a certain amount of commonality among them. And that commonality was by no means unrespectable set of values and beliefs. So that's the one thing he looks at, is the vague unity of the different counter-revolutionaries. But the other thing he looks at is why they failed. And that too is an important study. He makes the point that it had nothing to do with the value either of their ideas or of their either their ideas or their um, personal rectitude. It had everything to do with their inner fire, with their fury or lack of it. And he points out that revolutionaries know what they want, whereas counter-revolutionaries, as a rule, they're better at knowing what they don't want. And this is an issue that continues to the present day. So,
So yeah, you put this on my radar a long time ago, maybe 8 years or so ago. I haven't gotten to it yet. If you guys want to read this book, you pretty much have one option. You're gonna have to go to the Internet Archive, because it's out of print. even the old copies, the used copies, you're gonna have to pay $79 hardcover on Amazon. But
But
I have to say, it sounds like a really intriguing book.
I'll tell you, just to give you a sample, um, as one does, he was a tremendous writer, Dot Molnar, and a good man.
Hmm.
And as I say, I had the pleasure of knowing him, and yeah, it looks like everything he's got is on archive. His thing on Bernanos, Utopia, Politics in the State, A Catholic View, The Pagan Temptation, The Church Pilgrim of Centuries. I think that was his last book. My copy at home is signed by him. The first few paragraphs. Ever since the first stirrings of political writers and critics of society have studied the crucial years preceding and following 1789. They were by no means only French, but British, Austrian, Spanish, Russian, in fact, of all nationalities. Their interests, in most cases, went beyond the French Revolution to what Tocqueville in the middle of the 19th century called the European Revolution, and later writers, without using a label, describe as a revolution of world dimensions. In this way, literature has come into existence, the general topic of which is the revolution of our time, although no library shelves have, to my knowledge, been set apart for the exclusive study of this phenomenon. Yet, the revolution constitutes a relatively well organized and well studied field in comparison with what I shall refer to in this book as the counter-revolution. It is at once apparent that the latter term, in contrast to the revolution, is not readily identifiable as an historic event or even a series of events. Without previous reflection about its meaning, someone queried might imply that the counter-revolution is an epilogue to the revolution, but one cannot set dates to its beginning and end, that it is an attitude of disapproval of revolutionary occurrences like terror or destruction of property. In short, the counter-revolution has never been systematically studied, either as an integral part of history or as a philosophy, a corpus of doctrine, even as an attitude of the mind. Queried, historians would say that we may distinguish counter-revolutionaries, revolutionary attempts during and after major revolutions. I would point to the Vendée uprising or Denikin's and Kolchak's resistance against Bolshevik takeover. But they would see little, if any, similarity between the two counter-revolutionary efforts and others for that matter, and would reject any suggestion that the aristocrats and peasants of the Vendée and the White Armies of 1919 were inspired by a similar philosophy. This is where matters are allowed to rest. Not that some prestigious names connected with the counter-revolution are forgotten, those of Burke, de Maistre, de Bonal, Donoso Cortez, Maurras. But even these mountain peaks of the counter-revolutionary landscape are not seen in relationship with one another, with historical events, let alone with the total context of the last 2 centuries. One reads their works as one reads interesting but hardly relevant documents for the study of history, political thought, and the evolution of the contemporary world. If they are seen at all, they are seen in isolation, situated on the side streets and back alleys, not on the main avenues on which the chariot of history allegedly thunders along toward its destination. So, obviously, he attempts to do just that. And in a lot of ways, he and von Kuehnelt-Leddihn, I would say the four thinkers that had the most influence on my early political thought were Molnar, von Kuehnelt-Leddihn, Belloc, Chesterton, and for a fifth, I would probably say von Löwenstein-Scharfenegg, Hubertus von Löwenstein-Scharfenegg.
You've never mentioned him before.
No, because he wasn't the major of the bunch, and he was kind of an odd guy, but he had some really good ideas in some ways, and there's The two books of his, I probably should save them for later, but the two books of Löwenstein's that really made an effect on me. He was a part of the resistance against Hitler. And so his one book that really got me was called After Hitler's Fall, which were his idea for where Germany should go and Europe should go after Hitler would eventually be gotten rid of, which, given that he wrote the book in 1934, you know. And then the other he wrote after the war was called The Germans in History. But French writers, of course, I would say De La Tour du Pin, de Maistre, and Maurras had the most effect on me. And Bernanos to a degree. You say I was very fortunate in a sense in that the schools I went to, both my Catholic high schools and the two colleges, had very wide libraries. So I was able to read a ton of these sorts of authors, which you really would not have found in most places then. And yet these people are all available online now, as you saw. I mean, Molnar's stuff, which was hard to find back when it was in print, thanks to archive.org, is easy to get a hold of.
All right. Time for the questions.
Okay, no, yes. I'm not entirely sure. Probably, but maybe not entirely. And yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's do the questions then.
All right. Will says, why is Scandinavia, specifically Sweden, considered so liberal and secular?
Well, they're considered liberal and secular because they're liberal and secular. They're the collapse in morals that hit the world in the 60s and 70s were spearheaded in Sweden and Denmark. Not so much Norway and Finland, but Sweden and Denmark. I mean, sex ed, as early as 1966, I think, was insisted upon there. And this stuff was still being fought in our country. The reason they were dominated by the socialists, basically from the Depression on. With of course, during World War II, Denmark was occupied by the Nazis, but they established social welfare states very early. There had been in all the Scandinavian countries, there were fights between conservatives and socialists that the conservatives had basically lost by World War II. So that's why it happened earlier. And similarly, the doctrinal decay that the Church of England went through in the past 40 years in the Scandinavian state churches, it set in earlier. So that's why they were ahead of everybody.
Right. I have a question about local. Jack says, I have a question about local politics in a monarchy. We know how the monarch and their respective governors and ministers rose to power. But what about very local politicians? Were mayors elected, appointed, or was it often an inherited position? Perhaps every country did it differently?
Not just every country, but often enough every province. Civic constitutions, if you study the history of them, they're extremely varied. In some places, the municipal offices were controlled by sort of a local untitled nobility, the patricians. In others, they were controlled by the guilds, and those could be trade guilds or merchants guilds or both. I mean, and it was just the varied nature of the thing was just huge. Uh, and you had different cities had different legal systems, and sometimes a number of cities, like the Magdeburg Code, was the code of law that was used in the city of Magdeburg. A lot of German cities adopted it because it worked. But if they adopted it, they would adopt it with local variations. So it was a bit weird.
Watch out for the windy fields.
Oh, hello, Wendy.
Yeah. So I think I remember. I think you were talking about how the mayor of London gets elected, and it's incredibly complex. It was like
Well,
several different organizations.
the livery companies, which are medieval guilds that have survived to this day. The city of London, the square mile, is the only city in the British Isles that still has its medieval constitution. And the Lord Mayor is elected by the members of the livery guild of the livery companies, which are the guilds. And you've got to be a member of one of them to be a freeman of the city of London. So it's and all the livery companies have their guild church, and they have their guild hall where they have dinners and so forth. They rarely have any real connection to the trade that they were part of. So, like the coopers, the barrel makers, they don't make barrels anymore, and some of them are trades that are completely extinct, but they retain the place they've had since the Middle Ages.
So how does that work? Is it just simply a social club? What like?
Well, it's it's more than just a social club, but it certainly operates to a great degree on the same principles. So, because you've got to be proposed by someone who's already in it and seconded and voted on, and then uh, once you're voted in, uh, then you become a member of the livery company with full voting rights and all that.
How exclusive are these? I mean, is this like the Knights of Columbus, or is this like I don't know?
Oh, you need a bit of money.
What? Why is that?
Well, because none of the positions in the thing are paid. I don't even think the Lord Mayor gets a
Well,
salary.
we're just talking about the membership, right?
Yeah, but as soon as you go in, see, don't forget, all of these livery companies support a bunch of charities, and some of them even support entire schools and particular parishes in the Church of England.
And
So,
this philanthropy is a function of each of the members'
yeah,
personal wealth.
yeah,
So they don't even run fundraisers or stuff like that. It's
I'm
just
sure they do. Let's
okay.
see. Let's see what we can find out. Why don't we go for well, I said the Coopers. Let's see if there's Coopers Livery Company. I don't know the Coopers, by the way. I'm just presuming there is one. Yeah, the Worshipful Company of Coopers. Uh, one of London's oldest livery companies. The master, Mr. John Fahey, there he is in his lovely robes. The Worshipful Company of Coopers is based in the city of London and received their royal charter in 1501 in Catholic times. In modern times, it has evolved into the trustee of 6 principal charities, of a social and charitable enterprise that retains an identity focused on the ancient craft of cask making, barrels. We welcome members to enjoy a fellowship around our shared values and an interest in the history, culture, and charitable endeavors that our company have pursued for the last 500 or so years. Following on from our successful open evening in March 2023, our next evening, which is designed to help those considering joining as freemen to the company, will be held on 18 September 2023. If you would like to attend, please email, etc., etc. Those interested in joining require a sponsor, an existing member of the company, should email the clock to notify us of your intention. So There's Cooper's Hall charitable work. That's what we want. Our work. What is it? The Cooper's Company itself is not a charity, but the Master Wardens and Court of Assistants, for the time being, are the trustees of Cooper's Charity, which is a registered charitable trust. It's an amalgamation of 5 former charitable trusts of varying ages of foundation, which derive their income from bequests made throughout the company's history, and the distribution of this income is governed by the charity's constitution. So what is it that they do, you might ask? And here are the former trusts, they give the names. And it says, to assist persons in conditions of need, hardship, or distress in the Greater London area, the County of Surrey, and members of the Worshipful Company of Coopers, the widows and dependents, to advance education generally, but not exclusively, connected to the trade of cooperage, and pupils of the schools associated with the Worshipful Company of Coopers, namely the Cooper's Company and Coburn School or Academy, and Strode's College, to preserve the history and heritage and to advance the public's education of the ancient trade of cooperage, and to support such other charitable purposes as the trustees may, in their absolute discretion, determine. So there you go. And they have the Cooper's Hall, a delightful pre-Georgian townhouse in the heart of the city of London, which has a dining room and everything else. It has their history. And just out of curiosity, because it doesn't say, Worshipful Company, Cooper's Guild Church.
Well, I don't understand that adjective that precedes worshipful.
Worshipful. They're all called the Worshipful Company.
Yeah.
Of it just means they're worth respecting. But they don't seem to have their own. They don't seem to have their own guild church, though. But a lot of them do.
Yeah, I'm going through them all at Wikipedia. It's interesting that they have guild churches. Every old-time occupation imaginable.
Yeah.
Makers of playing cards. Just everything. Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. That sounds quite modern, actually. Date of formation, 1992.
Yeah, they made a new one.
So this is not a static pool of medieval guilds. This is a continually developing pool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they've got. I'm just looking at St. Botolph's without Bishopsgate Parish and Ward Church, which means they've got something to do with the. They've got something to do with something or other. Yeah. Anyway.
So that's fascinating. So 111 of these companies in total. Sounds very involved to get a mayor elected to, because in a certain sense, it's so much more coordination. Seems like.
Yeah, it takes. I mean, if you look up Lord Mayor of London, and you look up, let's see, election. The Lord Mayor is elected at Common Hall, comprising liverymen belonging to all of the city's livery companies. Common Hall is summoned by the sitting Lord Mayor. It meets at Guildhall on Michaelmas Day, 29 September, or the closest weekday. Voting is by show of hands. If, however, any liveryman so demands, balloting is held a fortnight later, 2 weeks later. The qualification to stand for election is that one must have served as a city sheriff and be a current alderman. Since 1385, prior service as sheriff has been mandatory for election to the Lord Mayoralty. 2 sheriffs are selected annually by Common Hall, which meets on Midsummer's Day for this purpose. By an ordinance of 1435, the Lord Mayor must be chosen from amongst the aldermen of the City of London. Those on the electoral roll for each of the city's 25 wards select one alderman, who formerly held office for life or until resignation. Now each alderman must submit for re-election at least once in every 6 years. The Lord Mayor is then sworn in on November, on the day before the Lord Mayor's show, see below. The ceremony is known as the silent ceremony, because aside from a short declaration by the incoming Lord Mayor, no speeches are made. At Guildhall, the outgoing Lord Mayor transfers the mayoral insignia, the seal, the purse, the sword, and the mace, to the incoming Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor to be elected in November 2017 was known in April of that year. So, and then you may remember that the chapter on civic government in Star Spangled Crown was called Lord Mayor's Show. That's where I took it from.
All right. Okay, a question from Hoosier Jacobite. Greetings to Monsieur Coulombe and the Don. What are Charles's opinions on the German Empire, German unification, and the relation of Austria to a united Germany? Given the situation of the mid-19th century, what measures does Charles think would have proved a better solution to the German question than what actually occurred?
Well, I mean, I think firstly it was kind of a wrong turn taken in 1814 and 15 in the Congress of Vienna, when they did not revive the Holy Roman Empire and instead created the Germanic Confederation as a sort of placeholder for it. Because, I mean, there are reasons why they didn't, but with 2020 hindsight, we could see those reasons were not sufficient. Had they revived the empire, then it would have had been more venerable. It would have been a much better, much easier to defend than the Germanic Confederation itself, so recently created. Obviously, what I think ought to have happened was that the Germanic Confederation, the sort of Germanic Empire they were looking at, should have been not under the King of Prussia, but under the Emperor of Austria. Now, obviously, the Austrian lands outside the Confederation would have been. I mean, basically, what would have happened is you would have come to an 1867 style Ausgleich with Hungary and probably with Galicia and Croatia and so on in 1848 rather than 1867, because as Emperor of Germany, the Austrian Emperor would have had to have ruled his other lands separately, but he ended up doing that anyway. So I think that the what ended up happening with the dominance of Prussia put Europe on a collision course with World War One. But in some degree, of course, this was the fault of Franz Joseph, because in 1853, when Russia went to war with Britain and France over Crimea, well, not over Crimea, but over Turkey, and they fought the Crimean War in Crimea. Having helped Franz Joseph suppress Hungary in 1848, he asked him to help him against the British and French, and Franz Joseph refused. That turned out to have been a very short-sighted decision, because when he needed an ally, first against Sardinia and France, and then against Prussia, he didn't have one. So, but at any rate, seeing the Emperor of Austria, the Habsburg Emperor, as Emperor of Greater Germany, as well as King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, King of Galicia, King of Croatia, would have been my solution. You would have had a middle Europa, all right, but it would have been under the benevolent and unwarlike aegis of the Habsburgs rather than the always pushy Hohenzollerns. I say always, of course. I'd point out that the man who delayed Austria being thrown out of Germany was Frederick William IV, my favorite Hohenzollern, and the man they call the romantic on the throne.
Right. A question from the Jorgensen family. You say, I've been reading recently about the Anglican bishop Lancelot Andrews. He lived from 1555 to 1626. He is chiefly known for his many sermons, some of which were preached in the presence of King James I. The Anglican Church now venerates him as a saint, and his private prayers and devotions are quite popular worldwide and are even published by a Western Orthodox press, which is actually named in his honor. I find it curious that St. John Newman was a great admirer of Andrews and later edited several of his works, despite that Andrews was a very devout Anglican. Charles, can you give me some of your thoughts on this? And can Lancelot Andrews' work and legacy contribute to the growth of English Catholicism, especially the Anglican Ordinariate?
Well, okay. First, you've got to bear in mind about Lancelot Andrews is that he was part of a whole group of theologians. He was the earliest of them. You see, Puritanism had grown very strong in the Church of England. Calvinism had grown very strong. And there was a sort of Catholicizing reaction to it. Oddly enough, spearheaded partly by James I, who did not like the Calvinist dominies of Scotland and had introduced bishops into the Church of Scotland, which was not appreciated by the Calvinists. And this sort of Catholicizing element came up with the notion that Anglicanism was the via media between Catholicism and Calvinism. He was the first of, although he didn't last long under Charles I, he was arguably the first of a whole group of writers of that kind, of theologians of that kind, who were called the Caroline Divines, because most of them flourished under Charles I. And again, they tended to be Catholicizers, some of them more than others, and some of them more pro-Roman than others. Lancelot Andrews was not terribly pro-Roman. I don't remember whether he wrote anything against Catholicism. I know he wrote against Calvinism, and he wrote a lot more that was simply plain theology, and a good deal of which is acceptable by Catholic standards, but not everything. Can it be used? Well, it certainly should be re-examined to see if it can be used. And I'm not an expert on Lancelot Andrews, but we give Tertullian, although we know he died a Montanist, we give him a certain amount of leeway as a church father. I think, especially in terms of attempting to convert the Anglosphere, that we might do something similar with the Caroline Divines and with Lancelot Andrews. In other words, re-examine them and see what can be used.
That's hard, though. No? Okay.
I know, it take work. It'd be better we just babble Karl Rahner.
Okay, well,
I'll tell you this much. I would take Lancelot Andrews over Karl Rahner any day of the week.
all right. Kyle says, Dear Charles and Vinny, can Charles talk about the history and culture of taverns and inns in the Middle Ages? I've been asked to help write a fantasy story that centers around taverns, and there have been a lot of fantasy stories lately surrounding taverns and inns, as gathering places of scoundrels, adventurers, secret societies, pilgrims, vagabonds, etc. I have only a few articles about Jamaica Inn and Harry Bailey's Tabard Inn and the Cat and Fiddle Inn in London. Can Charles tell us about the place in history for inns and taverns, culture of medieval inns and taverns, and involvements of secret societies? Any information would be helpful.
Well, there was an inn, a very old inn, where they brewed a beer so brown that the man in the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill. You know that one?
Oh, yeah.
Well, hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the dish ran away with the spoon. The little dog laughed to see such a sport, and the cow jumped over the moon. Well, the tavern, of course, is a big part of life, full stop. Um, and generally speaking, taverns and so forth came in two varieties. Those that catered to travelers, I guess three, those who catered to locals, and those who catered to both. Um, you had some localities there just wasn't a great deal of travel, but the locals would want to the third place, between home and work, uh, and that was one kind of a setup. But if you were on a major trading route, on a road, on the King's Highway, well, then you'd have all sorts of travelers coming and going. And a place like that, there'd be a lot more anonymity. I mean, the first kind of place is usually the center of the community's life because it's apart from the church, that's the one gathering place of the locals. But if you're in a town on a trade route, on the King's Highway, then you'd have a pub that was either catered primarily to travelers, in which case be a lot of riffraff involved, and also the management might not be everything you would hope for. Sometimes they doubled as houses of prostitution. But then you'd have others like the Prancing Pony that were both. Because if you're in a town that's on a trade route, obviously you have people who live in the neighborhood, but you're also going to have travelers coming through. And of course, from time to time, there would be friction between the travelers and the townies.
Yeah, I've actually been meditating on this kind of stuff lately because, we had a question on Solange Hertz and electricity and the concept of, like our life being so different from how it used to be, like our perception of light versus dark is different. And I think one of the things that we lost is sort of the appreciation of the tavern and the inn, and in large part because of transportation and just the way daily life is. You know what spawned this is my trip to Santa Barbara, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And you explained to me, I had marked to go to Cold Spring Tavern, which is sort of in the mountains, kind of outside of Santa Barbara. And it was absolutely delightful place. It's very historical. But then you had explained to me, I think they did too, that this was a tavern that offered shelter and food and drink and all that, the accommodations, because you can't really go into Santa Barbara except through the mountains, and
Yeah.
it was really, really hard. So you needed this place to stop and just gather yourself. And
Yeah.
this is a huge part of life where we don't really, it's hard to relate to. But reading Emmerich, any of you who read Anne Catherine Emmerich, that's something that comes across in her writing. because the daily life of these people that lived during Jesus's time, they're walking everywhere, and it kind of doesn't ever stop. You're taken aback because everything is a journey, and it's
Yeah.
hard to imagine that kind of life almost, where pretty much every day or every other day is just kind of a marathon or a hike. And then obviously with that kind of lifestyle, you have inns and taverns being so important, you know.
Well, Longfellow, of course, wrote his famous Tales of a Wayside Inn. And the opening of it, I think, really captures this sort of thing. This is the prelude, The Wayside Inn, which is still there in Sudbury, Massachusetts, by the way, if you want to go there. And it's one of my favorite places on earth, I don't mind telling you. One autumn night in Sudbury town, across the meadows bare and brown, the windows of the Wayside Inn gleamed red with firelight through the leaves of woodbine hanging from the eaves, their crimson curtains rent and thin. As ancient as this hostelry as any in the land may be, built in the old colonial day, when men lived in a grander way, with ampler hospitality. A kind of old hobgoblin hall, now somewhat fallen to decay, with weather stains upon the wall, and stairways worn, and crazy doors, and creaking and uneven floors, and chimneys huge and tiled and tall. A reign of repose it seems, a place of slumber and of dreams, remote among the wooded hills. For there no noisy railway speeds its torch race scattering smoke in gleeds. But noon and night the panting teams stop under the great oaks that throw tangles of light and shade below. On roofs and doors and window sills across the road the barns display their lines of stalls, their mows of hay. Though through the wide doors the breezes blow, the wattled cocks strut to and fro, and half effaced by rain and shine, the red horse prances on the sign. Round this old-fashioned, quaint abode deep silence reigned, save when a gust went rushing down the county road, and skeletons of leaves and dust, a moment quickened by its breath, shuddered and danced their dance of death, and through the ancient oaks o'erhead, mysterious voices moaned and fled. And it goes on to describe the people that gather and the stories they tell. And that's the body of the book, are the stories, the tales of a wayside inn. And I can tell you, whenever I've sat in the old tap room, which goes back to colonial days, it's always run through my head. As ancient as this hostelry as any in the land may be, built in the old colonial day when men lived in a grander way. Are you looking at the Wayside Inn?
How did you know that? Where is it?
Sudbury, Massachusetts. Sudbury, Sudbury.
Wow, they market it as Longfellow's Wayside Inn. That's interesting.
It sure is. Well, I mean, he made it famous. And the landlord, who appears in the book, tells the landlord's tale, strangely enough. He was the last of the house with the family that opened it. And then eventually, I forget if it was Henry Ford or Rockefeller, one of the other bought it, but it was in bad shape, and reopened it. And I've been going there since I was a boy. I plan to go there this October.
It doesn't look like a typical inn. It's sort of, I don't know, made of brick and kind of almost looks like a house, honestly.
Yeah, that's a public house. Where do you think the name pub comes from?
I don't know.
It's a house for the public, a public house, a pub.
All right. Final question for today. Actually, no, there is no final question. But I thought I plucked a really you had done a really interesting tweet and I thought it'd be something that our audience would really enjoy, and it would be really fun.
You mean
Um,
about not being on Earth Prime?
well, that's fun too. Um, yeah, if any of you don't, well, I don't know if I can use the word Twitter or X or whatever that social media identifies as now. Charles has a really good. He's got a lot of really enjoyable posts, so it's worth giving him a follow on that. So, but anyhow, here he says Eric von Kuhnelt-Ledeen made a list of the 4 stupidest European politicians of the 20th century: Alexander Kerensky, Edward Beneš,
Finish.
Benish, Franz von Papen, and Anthony Eden. Although Eden was the best dressed, I do not dissent from that list. And so I thought this was a good one because, at least for me personally, I haven't heard of any of these people. And I felt like that list is a very special distinction.
Oh, it is. Yes,
So
yes. Very special.
and
You get to be you only get to be on that list. You a moron.
so can you go over these 4 and really explain what makes them qualify for this list?
For the great honor. Well, Alexander Kerensky was the leader of the provisional government that took over Russia after the Tsar abdicated. And rather than pursue common cause against the communists who were growing in strength with the remnants of the old regime, he did everything he could to sort of purge the remnants of the old regime. But the problem with that, in other words, he was soft on communism. But the problem with that was that they eventually revolted against him anyway, and he was out of a job. Whereas, had he collaborated with men like Kornilov and so on, he might have been able to strangle communism in its cradle.
That reminds me of one. I don't know if it was a Minnesota governor, where it was the whole defund the police thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah, like, let's do this." And he was trying to show his support, and they turned on him instantly. So
Well, he was a moron. I mean, just jump off a cliff. Do us all a favor. Anyway.
Okay.
Then Edward Beneš was originally the foreign minister of Czechoslovakia under Masaryk, and then he was the president of Czechoslovakia.
Windy Fields. Watch out for Windy Fields.
She says hi, by the way.
Oh, hi.
I told her you're her biggest fan, and she says you're welcome to catch her show at the Palladium next week.
Oh, great.
Anyway, so Beneš, he ended up presiding over Czechoslovakia during the Munich crisis, and then after the war was over, after World War II, he came back as president. So why was he stupid? Well, he was stupid because A, he opposed the Habsburgs and the idea of a Danubian confederation every way he could. B, in a multinational state like Czechoslovakia, he did his best to annoy all the minorities, the Sudeten Germans, the Slovaks, the Magyars, the Ruthenians. The problem was that taken together, they were the majority of the country. So that was pretty stupid, especially with the Germans and the Hungarians looking to expand and take over the areas they lost. And then, of course, he didn't or refused to realize, he tried to scupper, to wreck everything that Otto von Habsburg tried to do in America. Because he was a Habsburg, and Beneš hated the Habsburgs. He much preferred the Reds, and he got what he wanted good and hard. Because he too was soft on communism after the war, and he ended up being thrown out of office by the Reds. So he was a real moron. The third member of our cast of idiots was Franz von Papen, who was a German politician who actually had some good ideas, but his tactics stank. And he thought that he could use Hitler and the Nazis to establish conservative rule in Germany. Well, it worked out just the opposite. They used him. He barely escaped with his life in the Night of Long Knives, and he ended up spending World War II as Germany's ambassador to Turkey. So that was Franz von Papen. And lastly, Anthony Eden was Churchill's handpicked successor. He did not realize what a threat communism posed to Europe. And if that were bad enough, he, in 1956, he took Eisenhower's assurances that the United States would back Britain and France up at Suez. He took them at face value, and so, of course, was absolutely destroyed. So, but he was the best dressed of the four. Best looking, too. He was a snappy dresser, good looking guy. He was just a boob.
All right.
See, we're used to thinking of chicks as just being beautiful airheads. Men can do it too, you know.
All right, yeah.
Men can be good looking and not have a brain in their heads.
Well, that's Trudeau's daddy, isn't it?
It's Trudeau himself. His father had brains.
Oh, okay. That's right. Sorry.
Little Justine is, I'd say she's brain dead, but that would imply the brain was alive at some point. And we don't know for sure.
All right,
I'd be unwilling to say that she was ever alive mentally. I would not stake my reputation on that. But you want to get out of here.
Yeah.
You know, I can tell that.
Yeah.
You know why?
Why?
I have like this sixth sense.
Oh, nice.
All right, fine, be that way. But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What is it if it's off the Monday?
Oh. Terry, I can't tell if you're... Oh no! Oh no! I'm sorry. Okay, it's off.
What is it if it's Monday? What is it if it's Monday? Let's help you with this.
It's off the menu.
And whose soul might you save?
It might be your own.
All right, we'll see you next week, ladies and gentlemen. Be good.